All right, so we're going to get started in just a second here.
Okay.
All right, looks like we're good.
Cool.
All right, so let's get started. Hey guys, it's Onia once again. I haven't done a video in a long time. I've been taking a hiatus. Been dealing a lot with work and things like that, and um, I really want to invest time to make these videos for you guys, but I'm trying to take my time for now. But this one idea I had wanted to do is start interviewing people on with different perspectives. And so today we're going to try this and see how it goes. This is the first interview, and I'm interviewing my brother-in-law, and he is an unbeliever. So what that means in the context of this video discussion is that he doesn't subscribe to any particular religion, um, but he does believe in God or in his way. So we're going to be discussing what that way is and see if we can get some common ground and learn from each other. And I'm sure we're not going to come to agreement on many different things, but it's going to be fun to discuss. And we, him and I, have discussed these type of things like loosely here and there privately. But it's gonna for me. I thought it'd be kind of a cool idea to bring it all together in like a more organized format, and we would just discuss a lot of the different things. So first off, I just want to say I'm coming from the perspective. I think it's would be good if we both start with what our biases are. So my bias is that, first of all, I do am a believer in the Bible. Well, of course, my version of the Bible is quite different. But uh, so when I say that's my bias, basically I come from the perspective of I assume by default that something that's mentioned in one of the books of the Bible is true unless or until I can prove otherwise. So I come from a perspective of starting from that perspective, but being open to critiquing, criticizing passages of the Bible. And if we can prove using science or history that certain verses are incorrect, then we should go with the evidence and however we come to grips with that. One of the ways I come to grips with that is that through scribal changes over time, so that the original text might not have necessarily had that error, but the current text definitely does. So we have to reject the current text because it just contradicts the evidence. So that's kind of the perspective I start from and how I try to make sense of things. But I'm always trying to look for evidence and refine my views based on everything I'm seeing. So, what about you? What would you say is your biases, if you can?
So, as succinctly as I can put it, my bias is that it's hard to. Interesting. What's a verse you found to be incorrect? Um, is that it's hard to take the Bible literally when so much of it appears to be allegorical, and so uh, I just I don't know. I've read through the Bible a million times, and I haven't had the pleasure of reading through the Quran or the Torah, but they all have similar rules, similar ideas, but then they differ so greatly with what is the same God in theory. So my bias is
Yeah,
it's hard to trust the Bible. It's used as a weapon more than it's used for good. So, in my opinion,
yeah, yeah. And so the uh, one thing that I found, like Christians or believers in the Bible, they very much want people to be open minded about the Bible. But how often do you see uh, believers of the Bible being open minded to other religions? So I think it makes sense that other people from different perspectives may be skeptical about the Bible just because they're coming from a different perspective. And there's no reason, like for me, I said my bias is I start from the perspective that the Bible's true. Well, these other people, they start from the bias that the Quran is true or whatever, or that none of it's true. So we have different biases we're starting from. Um, but one quick clarification: you may already know this, but the Torah is part of the Bible. It's just the first five books. There's another thing for like the Jews. They have the Talmud,
I'm
and
sorry,
that
yeah, the Talmud.
yeah, that has their their own authority as well. But anyways, what was it?
I said again, I haven't read it, so you said
Yeah.
it.
Well, for the Talmud, I haven't. I've read bits and pieces, but there's so much in it that I haven't gotten around to studying it extensively. But it's very much an offshoot of the Bible, and the
Right.
Quran is like related, but it's very much a different thing. So, anyways, let's get started. So, I did make a rough outline of what we're going to be discussing today. And so, for starters, I wanted to start with the what our conception of God is. So maybe if you want to share first, how do you define God, or what is God to you? If you could give a personal definition, it doesn't have to be whatever you personally believe that God is. So let's hear it.
So um, I'm gonna tell you by way of sort of a story. Growing up, I had a friend who was very confused about religion and everything, and he had this whole concept of if we had to be created by God, then what created God? God's God. And what created God's God? God's God. And so he said, so at some point, something had to just poof into existence. So why isn't it us? And so he was some form of agnostic, atheistic. I'm not sure. I'm one step removed from that. Something created us. What exactly it is, how it happened, the process by which it happened, divine or scientific, doesn't really matter. There's a design to all of this. It's too structured to be random. There's order to chaos, but there's too much order to this chaos. So something designed this. So my concept of God is an all-encompassing creator, but I also subscribe to the idea that we are all part of that
We are all part
connected.
of. Say it again.
We're all part of that connected eternal being in a way. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, so I didn't realize what you were saying earlier, but you were saying that someone had said something in the chat.
Oh yeah.
What's a verse you found to be incorrect? So we don't want to get too much on a tangent here, but I will just briefly answer this. So one of the easiest contradictions or incorrect things that you can demonstrate is internal inconsistencies or parallel passages where it's the same exact passage, two different books, but they're saying contradictory information. And the easiest one to prove it is with numerical differences. So one version of a list, like both of the lists are clearly the same list, but one list says certain numbers and the other list has slightly different numbers. And it's clearly the same context list, but the list numbers are not adding up. The names are spelled slightly differently, things like that. So that's one where if you admit, oh yeah, that's a difference, it doesn't change your doctrinal or worldview, but that in and of itself, I think, is significant because it shows that the Bible has errors or inconsistencies. So that opens up the door to other possibilities, which could affect doctrine. So it's important to start from the baby steps of those small contradictions because those make it plausible that there could be larger contradictions. But there's a whole, you could go into a whole different, huge video series on all the different inconsistencies. Oh, I'll say one more. Daniel, the book of Daniel, says Nebuchadnezzar was the king for a certain event. But when we look at history, the actual king was a different king entirely. It was Nabonidus. So that's an inconsistency with history. So that's another example. But anyways, we'll get back to the subject of what we were discussing. So I have a very unique view. It doesn't come from a specific passage in the Bible, but just through my study and analysis. And one of the starting points of how I started thinking about this was the whole idea of, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Are they three persons or whatever? Or, are they the same entity or not? And I have eventually come to the conclusion that so you have the initial God creator or whatever created us, and then basically I don't know if you want to call it the Big Bang or something analogous to that. And then uh, God remains intact fully, but then it's almost like he duplicated himself, and the duplication um, like splintered into trillions and trillions, untold trillions of fragments, and we are those fragments. So basically, we are small pieces of God, and uh, Jesus, or the Son, God the Son, or whatever, would be one of the larger fragments. So one of the more significant fragments, but it's still a fragment of the ultimate God. And the Holy Spirit, for me as well, would be a piece of the full thing. So anyway, that's kind of a quite a different perspective. It's kind of some ways similar to Hinduism, where Hinduism believes that everything potentially is a manifestation of the ultimate divine, or reincarnation process. Eventually, everything goes back to God, returns to God. So there's some similarities in other religions, but anyway, that's kind of one unique view I have about God. Let's see here. So I was going to say one of the like if you ask someone to define what is God, one of the normal definitions that you would hear from someone is with the capital G. God is omnipresent, so everywhere, uh, omniscient, he knows everything. And part of knowing everything includes knowing everything that will ever happen. So having an absolute knowledge that before anything happens. And then the other one is omnipotent, where God can literally do anything. He has no limitations. The power, he literally snap a finger and do anything he wants. So those are and then an additional one is God is all good. But throwing a wrench into the definition of God would be the lowercase g God, where you have all these different religions that have their version of God. Oh yeah, the other part of God is eternal or uncreated. But you have these other uh, religions where you have the lowercase g, and the gods are created. They have a beginning. They have moral flaws, many of them, or at least inconsistencies with one another. Um, they are limited to space and time. They don't know everything that's going to happen. They have weaknesses. They can't do certain things. But yeah, so I think how we define God is important because it's very plausible that our definitions lead to contradictions of what we believe about the world, or logical fallacies and things like that. So the like, for example, all knowing. I know some believers of the Bible who believe that God the Father, or just every aspect of God, does not know the future, because in their belief, logically, there's no way you could know the future before it happens, because that would be deterministic, and they don't believe in it. They think that determinism is contradictory to free will and things like that. So their conclusion is that our starting belief about what God is what's wrong, because in their mind that leads to the contradiction. If God knows all things, and we can't have free will, so either God knows everything and we don't have free will, or we have free will and therefore God doesn't know everything. So that's one interesting take on it. And I kind of lean to the view that the ultimate God creator knows everything, that initial God. But in terms of, I kind of go more to the side of limited in power or limited in ability. And I think limited ability explains a lot of issues people have with the concept of a God. One of the things being the problem of evil and things like that. But yeah, so that's kind of a different take I have. Let me see, what was I going to say? And like I said, I think God the Son is a created God, not the uncreated. That's the difference between mainstream Christianity. Mainstream Christianity teaches the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were always there, and they were all uncreated. But that just seems weird, because if the Son, like, how would you have a Son of the Father if the Son was always there? Then he wouldn't be Son.
But yeah.
So it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. So there's inconsistencies with the mainstream Christian view. Oh yeah, this is what I was going to say. I subscribe to the view of what the ultimate core definition of a god is having some aspect or control over nature in a higher sense. Like, you've heard, like, with the different pagan religions, the god of this, the god of that, where they're appointed, essentially. They're like almost like a king or ruler over an aspect of nature.
Right.
So god of love, god of war, blah, blah, blah. So, god of rain, things of that nature. So for me, that's the ultimate sense of a god is a being that has power over an aspect of nature. It's just that our what we call God, the capital G, is what we believe is the ultimate control over everything. So, anyways, do you have any specifics on what you think about this ultimate God creator that you mentioned? You said we don't necessarily know what it might be, but do you have any thoughts on what you think it could be? Like, does it have a consciousness or sentience? Like, does this God know who you are, or is it does not? It does not really. It's not alive in the sense that we are.
Whether or not it's alive and whether or not it's aware of our existence are two different things. Um, the concepts in the Bible are that we were created in the image of God and that we are the end all be all. We're supposed to be God's children. I don't know that I ascribe to that belief in Christianity because of what you were talking about there with the all powerful, all knowing, all present. It's just not possible for a being to be all of those things and have evil in the world. I think we've talked on this before. If there was an all powerful, all knowing, and all loving God, he could have created free will without the possibility of evil. And if he couldn't, he's not all powerful. And if he could, but he didn't, then he's not all good.
Right. That's the classic dilemma. Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I said earlier, I side more with the answer that that God is not all powerful, that he has limitations. And I think that for me, that is the best explanation you can come up with.
Right. In the sense he got the ball rolling, he created. That's what I think defines the power of creation and manipulation.
Yeah, and you think he actually essentially made a decision or chose to start this process?
Yes, that's the other thing, is because otherwise, you get into the Star Trek replicator as God because it can take energy and turn it into matter. No, that's not what we're saying. It's the active sentience and that power that makes you a god.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I would agree with that. He was that initial starter and put everything into place. And I have the unique perspective that, like, let's see, one of the things I said I added some stuff to our outline later just for myself.
Okay.
But I said, let's see, where did I have it? So you know how I said I believe that everything else of creation, including the lower being, like the Son of God, would be a lower fragment, still a significant fragment, but a fragment just like us. So I believe in a form of deism where the initial God created everything, put everything in motion, and then essentially leaves it to his creation to run things. But that creation includes the Son of God and other what we would call angels. I would call them gods. But these angels are also fragments, but they're lesser fragments, and we're all pieces of the puzzle. When you mentioned the image of God, one of the things that I find interesting is that the Bible actually doesn't necessarily explain what that means. So a lot of Christians assume that it means that only humans matter, and to that extent. But I don't agree with that definition. Or the other one is that only humans are spiritual beings or moral beings. Now, I've heard people say animals don't have souls. They've also said animals don't have spirits. I've heard both, because sometimes people get confused of what the difference between a spirit and a soul is. But there's a bunch of passages in the original Hebrew that you can show animals do have souls. When it comes to spirits, there's like maybe just one verse in the Old Testament which implies that they have that they also have spirits. So it's a little bit weaker to show the idea that they have spirits from the Bible. But so I come from that perspective that animals have souls and spirits just like us, and that they're part of the puzzle. So that I understand being made in the image of God to be more about our role in the creation. So when you look in the Genesis account, you have each day of creation. And no, we were not created on the first day or the second or the third, fourth. Most of the animals were created before us. We were created on the last day. So it almost seems like, that we were an afterthought in some sense. But then it says that what he wants us to do, he wants us to have dominion over creation. So what does dominion mean? Most Christians seem to think it means we're supposed to dominate everything and subjugate everything to us. But I think it means more of oversee it. We are the caretakers. We are the rulers. So we are supposed to take care of the earth. We have the power to make the world a better place or destroy the world. So we're supposed to rule over it, righteously rule over it, and not rule over it in a tyrannical way.
Right.
So that's how I view image of God. I don't view it as some spiritual, special magical spiritual thing that humans are unique. I think it's a role we've been given. Like to give a small example, like ants. You know how I don't like killing bugs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in some sense, ants to humans is like humans to the ultimate God creator. So humans are just a teeny tiny thing. What significance do we have compared to God? In the same way, you could say that make the same case for insects or animals to humans. But does that mean we should just kill these creatures? Well, if we do that, then we're kind of almost like when we complain, why God are you letting this happen to us? And God is the human to us bugs. If God is squishing us, so that's kind of how I look at it. That the whole thing, do unto others as you would want to do it to you. You want God to be good to you, so you need to be a good God to the minuscule things, and take care of everything. So, anyways, that's my perspective on that. Any more thoughts on the definition of God? Because we have the next thing about prayer, which kind of ties into the concept of God. But I didn't want to prevent you from saying anything.
Um, no, I mean we talked about the definition of what makes God God or a God a God. I don't have anything more than like the baseline, the power of creation and manipulation of that creation.
Oh, I have a further thing to say. Like so, in further support that it's not all about us. You have the entire universe. How many planets are out there? The big universe, and also like the deep, deep oceans.
Right.
There's so much in these oceans, and they are just minding their own business, living their life. What's the purpose of it all? These sharks and whales, or whatever, live hundreds of years. At least sharks do, from what I've read. They live hundreds of years. What? Just to sit around, float around, and for nothing? I think there's a greater purpose than just humans. Humans are an important piece of that puzzle, and you've mentioned to me before about how humans, they're the only ones that have done this amazing technology, and the language, the complex language, way more advanced than any other species. So we are significant, and we are clearly different in that sense. But I don't think it means that we're all that matters. And like I think if humans didn't exist, God's purpose overall for creation would still be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that
Well,
humans is the complete fulfillment. But without humans, everything else in the plan of God would still be there. So but yeah, so let's. Oh yeah, this was my question I was going to ask you. So I mentioned lesser gods or angels or whatever. Do you believe, or are you open to the possibility that there might be something similar to what some might call an angel or a spirit of some type that we don't know about? What's your thoughts on that? Some people associate it with aliens or whatever. So, any thoughts on that, or are you kind of undecided?
so the idea that there are other higher level of existence beings that are not God.
that are not the ultimate God, but they are like us. They were created. They serve a purpose.
I mean,
They
biblically,
could,
that rings true. You have the angels and then man. So biblically, that rings true. But I don't know that we have a whole lot of evidence to sway us in that direction, other than by looking at the holy texts of different religions. Um, and those are just too vague. They're written by man, and they're described in such weird ways. Spinning wheels of fire. A lot of people will do the ancient aliens UFO connection there, and
yeah,
I don't know. I think it's more likely that they are a higher level of existence creature than that they are an alien species visiting. And the reason for that is science. It's not illogical to assume that alien life exists. It is highly illogical to assume that they would ever make it to Earth. Travel in space is not easy.
yeah,
And so why would a species be traveling here to just like sit in the background? There would be
yeah.
literally no purpose.
So I would I like you mentioned about the evidence. I would agree that for the most part, evidence is quite limited from like outside of religious texts of like it's different when you argue for the existence of the ultimate creator. There's like kind of like a logical need for that.
Right.
But when it comes to these other things, there's not as much need for it, at least from our limited perspective. It doesn't seem like there's as much need for these beings to exist. But I will say, from my perspective of how I said I kind of believe that the ultimate God is more like a deism, and then the lesser, like the rest of the creation, takes care of itself. I think if you were to find evidence outside of religious texts of what some people might call supernatural intervention or divine intervention or whatever, I think it would almost of necessity have to be a limited being intervening, like some type of a higher being doing an intervention, because we've already established that probably the initial creator is hands off, is not directly intervening. So if there is any interventions that can be established, it probably is someone like a human. Humans intervene in the world. So if there is any higher intervention, it would probably be some type of what we might call an angel or something. So I would say that's probably the only evidence route you could go outside of religious texts of potentially evidence for at least one being out there making things happen.
I would agree that's more likely than a direct divine intervention, that there is a slew of one or more other higher beings with less
That
power
and
trying to
that
manage.
and that they, to varying degrees of success or non-success, intervene.
Right.
So let's see here. So let's get to prayer. So sorry for taking forever to get to prayer. All right. So we've talked about this before, but do you? Let's start with. Do you think that prayer has any value whatsoever? And if so, what is that value?
Okay. This is a tough question to answer, because do I think it has a value? Yes, but not in the way that you think I'm saying. It's for you. Prayer is for you. It is you talking to your higher being, praying for the strength to manifest your own destiny. It has absolutely no effect on anything else. 100% non-starter, hands down, not negotiable to me. Because if it does, and children have cancer, someone's the asshole.
Yeah.
Who's out there
Yeah.
praying that those kids still get cancer? Because everybody's praying for it to stop.
Right.
So,
So I'll share my perspective on it, and I've shared with you before, but to clarify, so um, even from the Bible, if you look at, people pray, and God sometimes answers these prayers, and He sometimes doesn't. So what's going on? Why aren't prayers being answered? And more importantly, why are minor prayers being answered supposedly and not significant prayers? And that's more relevant to like modern times. So you have people in our modern times who, they're praying that they win their soccer game, or they praying that they get a good grade on their test, or please help me get this house. I want to buy this house. And then you buy this house and you say, God answered the prayer. Or you get, I want to get this job. Please, God, give me this job. And you get the job. Thank you, God, you answered my prayer. if you didn't get the job, well, God didn't want me to have that job. So that's kind of the way people
Yeah.
think. But then, then all of a sudden you have so and so is raped, so and so dies, like you said, of cancer, so and so is murdered, and you prayed for that not to happen. You prayed for protection. Please, God, protect my kids, keep them safe. And, lots of times people have this bias of they're a believer, so nothing bad's going to happen to them. But there are many times where something horrible and traumatic happens to believers as well, even in the Bible as well as in modern life.
Right.
So, so the question is, what purpose does prayer have for these instances when it doesn't make sense on the surface level that God would, he's looking around, like kind of like Bruce Almighty, looking around which prayers are going to answer, and all right, I'm going to answer. Oh yeah, that kid needs to get that good grade on that test, and that person, oh, you need that house. Oh, that person's being raped. That's okay. We'll pass over that one. Oh, that person's getting murdered. Blah blah blah. Cancer. I like cancer. Let's keep it. It doesn't make sense. So, but does that mean then prayer is in your direction? Is prayer only self benefiting, or is it still possible that it has a greater power? I still side with the view that there is some greater power, but that it is quite different than most mainstream people believe. So, like I said, I agree with you that I personally think the default position is that most prayers, there's not, almost none of the time is there direct divine intervention. I think that's it. There is divine intervention, but it's an exception to the rule. So, are you going to want to say something?
Yeah, but I was going to wait for you to finish.
Okay, yeah. So, no, you want to say it? Yeah, sure.
What are the divine interventions that you think happened? Because there are so many large-scale horrific things that have happened in the world that God chose not to, intervene. I mean, just go to the Holocaust. Start right
Yeah,
there.
I think it's more of a limited thing where it's like God will. Or I'm hearing an echo. I don't know if. Let's see.
I'm
Or,
on headphones.
okay, it's good now. I don't know what was going on there. That was weird. But so I think it's more of the point of a, like, again, limited intervention. So I think it's more of I'm going to intervene in these cases, but only because this is the minimal involvement I need to do to prevent some really horrible things from happening.
There were at least two very well executed assassination attempts on Adolf Hitler. They failed. God couldn't just small intervene there? Couldn't make
Well,
Project Valkyrie take
the
off?
ultimate God was not going to be intervening, but the
Minor God could have made that go off.
so so here's what I would say about that. We don't know necessarily how many other Holocausts could have happened. So my idea has been that perhaps, again, we can't necessarily prove this, but perhaps the Holocaust that happened, like there may have been another world where many Holocausts would have happened in different generations, and they allowed this one to happen so that other ones would not happen. Sort of like the ultimate, like preventing it from happening ever again type of thing.
But that's now you're back into an all-knowing God who can see the future and knows how all of the pieces fall, which removes free will again. So he knows that he can't stop Hitler because if he stops Hitler, there'll be 10 other Hitlers. How does he know that if there's free will?
So how I get around this conundrum, or the way I understand it,
Way. Okay, here we go.
so so you have in my view, the ultimate God knows everything, but the Son of God, or what we might call Jesus, does not know everything. So he might be able to get some insights about the future from the Creator God, and he can use that to his advantage. But he still has limited access to the future. He still doesn't know certain things about what's going to happen, but he can use certain previews that are given to him by the Creator God to kind of sort of like guide him to give him like sort of like an outline, a format of how he might try to run the world. But he's still kind of operating just as you or I are without knowing fully what's going to happen. But he has insights on the future. That's kind of how I think.
So you're Jesus' middle management.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And so, he only gets to see 50 years in the future every now and then when Dad lets him. So when he gets that information, he has to do what he can. Ooh, what happens if I kill that guy? Oh, worse things. Let's not do that.
It's like the ultimate God is like advisor to the one in power, and then the one in power just has to go off of that. So that's how I go around the whole inconsistency between free will and because otherwise, if he knows everything that's ever going to happen, then I think he could have prevented so many tragedies from happening, and he didn't. So I think that is a huge problem. I think limited knowledge of the future helps explain how these atrocities could happen. But he may have had some knowledge of the future where this is necessary. I will say, as an example of ignorance of Jesus or whatever, so the whole thing about Jesus had to die for our sins. He came to the world to die for our sins. Now I believe that in a different way, but I still believe that some type of concept like that. But a thorn in this concept is how the Bible says it has Jesus praying in the garden to the Father, please God, if possible, let this cup pass from me. He's saying, please don't let me die. Which seems weird because if he knows that this is necessary to save the world, why is he praying that this doesn't happen to him? He's actively praying that everyone goes to hell. Like, what's going on here? And then on the cross, when he's on the cross, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is a weird thing to say if you know the plan, if you're perfectly understanding the plan and you're like, yeah, I have to die to save the world. This is necessary. There's no other way that it could be done.
Right.
But he says, why, God? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you letting this happen? So I take that as kind of evidence that, maybe God the Son doesn't know certain things and some of the plan is a mystery to him. And that's, some bad things will happen. The Holocaust is a horrible thing that did happen. But we could point to so many things throughout history that have happened that are similar levels of atrocity.
Right, of course.
So many different wars. Why did all these wars happen? I think it was. So I do not believe divine intervention can completely override free will. So it may have been that in those assassination attempts, that intervention just wasn't sufficient enough to lead to that happening because there was no situation in which the free will person would have been successful. You would have had to literally, God would have had to possess them and literally make them do the moves to make it happen. It may be the case that it just was the pieces couldn't fit together because of our free will. So that's how I would say that. But maybe God was involved in those assassination attempts and tried to help them do it, but then it failed.
So my thought on that is just if prayer has limited effect for when it can be divine intervention, when it is divine intervention, it is unclear how strong the effect will be, exactly what you wanted, part of what you wanted. What's the point?
Yeah, that's good. I said, let's see, what did I put in here? So I had a few different theories of prayer here. One is someone might say prayer gives God or the lesser God power or authority to do things. So maybe God can't do certain things unless you pray for it. Then it gives him the power to do something. But still, that doesn't quite explain why God still doesn't do things if you pray for it and you give him power to do it, but he's still not helping you. So, but then I have an idea that's kind of similar to yours, but well, this is one I've talked about before with you. Prayer has I say prayer has natural slash scientific power to change the reality of the world we live in through a universal energy connections. It's like a telepathic thing. I know you're kind of skeptical on that. We've talked about that before, but that would be a more sensible system of how it could be done without intervention. It would be an actual scientific process, a system where there's no emotions involved in it. It's just a process that happens, just like any normal physical cause and reaction. And then the other one that I have is kind of like what you said. Prayer is intended to serve a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts.
That's me.
So,
That's the one for me.
so, but I think it could be a little bit more than what you're saying. I think it could actually have power, but limited to yourself. So, like,
Okay, yes, I'll give you that. Limited to you. When you pray, you get the strength, literal divine strength is given to you to do the thing, but it doesn't do a thing for you.
well, so for example, let me give an example. We have a few things about the power of the mind where you take the pill or whatever, and the pill is a what placebo it's called, where it doesn't literally do anything, but the power of your mind believing that it does something is enough to give it a little bit of an extra boost.
Right.
It's not enough to cure you of something incurable, but it's enough to give a little bit of a boost to certain things.
Right.
And I think that actually has real power. So that in a similar way, like how you have adrenaline rush and things like that. If you pray for strength, and you can get that boost, but it's a natural boost. It's not a boost necessarily from God. It's
Right.
but it's something that you're actually initiating this reaction, this chemical reaction you're initiating through prayer. So I think you could make a strong case that is something that does happen. These other things are less clear to prove without religious texts or whatnot. So I think we do agree that prayer is important, at least in a framing your mindset and pointing you in the right direction. But in terms of whether it leads to any intervention at all, I think the vast majority of any interventions, if there are any interventions, it's primarily from a system set up, a scientific system set up that just automatically answers prayer. But it's not necessarily answering prayer, it's just cause and reaction. If you are connecting to the system somehow, then it'll answer certain things. Or it will, like, let's say you're praying for your job, to get this job. This connection may make it more likely for you to get the job. It's not going to necessarily definitely make it happen, but it may lead to a greater attraction to that job, and the employer might be more drawn to you. Some thoughts in their head might give them more positive vibes towards you or whatever. So I think that's the vast majority of prayer. And there may be some exceptions like divine intervention, but it would be very rare. And like I said, exception to the rule. Because otherwise, if it's not exception to the rule, then why isn't God answering the important prayers? Why is he answering supposedly all the silly prayers that don't matter, and all the important prayers he's not answering? It doesn't make sense. And all throughout history, miracles like basically never happened most of the time. But when Jesus was here, he did all these amazing miracles according to the Bible. The apostles, his direct successors, did these amazing miracles. Select few prophets in the Old Testament did these amazing miracles. But the majority of the populace did not have that power. So it seems like, again, miracles, it seems like the exception to the rule is miracles. But the rule is that there are no miracles supposed to be done. It's a very rare exception. For Jesus, maybe it was to establish that he was the Messiah or whatever. The apostles, to start the church, they needed significant power to start the church. But once they started it, then we don't need the miracles anymore. The prophets, significant power to prove their authority to the people they were sent to. But beyond that, I think there's no real basis for us to believe in miracles the vast majority of the time. I think it's more a natural process. That's how I take it.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that.
Oh, I convinced you. No, I'm just joking. You agree with everything I just said.
No, general
All right.
concept.
Yeah. All right. So we kind of already talked about this, but I don't know if we want to say anything further on this. I said the problem of evil. Do you feel like we kind of addressed that sufficiently enough, or do you still think the problem of evil is not adequately dealt with what we have?
we've kind of covered it. We have slightly different opinions on it, but it's very much free will and laissez-faire. We agree that the only way for that to be possible is God is either not all powerful, not all knowing, or not all good, and that's fine. We can never know which, but I would tend to lean towards what you say, where it might just be that he's bound himself by rules to limit his direct intervention and created a more free environment. So
And
yeah,
to throw a wrench into it, there was the group called Gnostics way in the first early centuries, and they basically believed the same thing that I did, except they believed that um, the the lesser God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, was an evil God, and that all these horrible, the problem of evil is because this lesser God was a bad God, but the greater Creator God is a good God, but he was a hands off, the same thing, but he left it in the hands of his creation, and his creation botched it up. So that is a possibility. I don't subscribe to that, but that's what Gnostics believe. So that it's kind of interesting to see that they believe that.
yeah.
But all right, so um, oh yeah, the other thing for like for cancer and all these horrible diseases, I think it's still a something that we should be struggling with. Why do these things exist? Why didn't what caused them to exist? Is it just when you hands off? Is that just what naturally happens, type of thing? Do these diseases come into existence? So it's something difficult to understand. Why do these horrible diseases and sicknesses happen? I think it very much has to do with a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them have to do with genetic disorders, like genetic birth defects.
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of our fault in a sense. Like if we have too close genetics, then it gets corrupted or mutations. But there are other things like viruses, which are more difficult to understand. But even those, it may be a simple explanation of it. Just that's when you have a hands-off approach, that's what ends up happening. Just like we have all the different animals and everything,
Right.
some process might have led to viruses from that. Somehow they're existing, and we see new virus strains all the time. So some process is happening to cause this. And it seems some natural process. So unfortunately, the way the world is, it has that. But I personally believe that God, the ultimate creator God, couldn't have made the world much different than the way it is. Like, for example, the laws of physics. I think the laws of physics are such a way that you can't make it any other way. It just wouldn't even be possible. God couldn't be like, you know what, I want it so that. No, I can't even think of a good example of the laws of physics. But like, or no, let's say no gravity.
Hmm.
I know there's some people who don't believe that gravity exists, but let's say gravity is necessary. Well, I don't think if gravity is necessary, then I don't think God could create a world where gravity does not exist. Unless there would have to be some other system or process in place that serves the same physical results. You need something in place that follows mathematical laws, and the mathematical laws are not created by God, in my view. Like God's not making 1 + 1 = 2. That's just what it is. In the same way, like you talked before about, you keep going back. Who created that? Who created that? For God, I believe that's the same for principles of the reality itself, where logical principles of like 1 + 1, that was not created. That had to exist in the same way God had to exist. So there's certain core concepts or logical principles or laws of nature, I guess you could say, that had to always be there, in my view. And another thing that I sort of believe is that the universe potentially is the body of God.
That's kind of what I was saying before, that we're all sort of part of one thing, including and up to God.
All right, so now let's go to um, basis of morality. So one of the things that I've talked with atheists, and I know you're not atheist, but I've talked with. Oh, and by the way, one of the reasons that I thought it would be relevant for us to discuss today is because so many years back, I would study about the Bible and try to prove things about the Bible or not, and there would be websites from atheists that would go and show contradictions from the Bible. One of them is called Skeptics Annotated Bible. Now, I believe atheists come from a bias, so sometimes they're looking for contradictions and find it in places that they don't actually are. They're not actually there, but they
Right.
want it. They're kind of like eager to find it, and we all have that bias to some extent, trying to find something to fit what we currently believe. I think it's something we can overcome, but I think it's a bias that we have to struggle with to overcome that. I think, but I value those websites because they come from a perspective that's not blinded by the Christian bias. The Christian bias is everything in the Bible is true; it can never be flawed. Everything's perfect in the Bible. There are no errors, no contradictions, and I believe that it contradicts the evidence. But if you have a position that you will not change your views no matter any evidence, then your position is bad, or your where you're coming, the way you're approaching your position is bad, because we need to be open to evidence. We need to be open to change. So I think that I found that refreshing from atheists because they had a perspective that mainstream Christians were refusing to give evidence, and I value that. So I've interacted in the past with atheists and looked at some of their resources, and I find some value in it because they can look at the Bible or look at certain ethical issues without the bias of, well, this has to be because God said it. It has to be this way. So I appreciate that, and that's why I think it can be relevant or invaluable to have discussions like this between you and I, because you don't have a religious text telling you what to believe, so you can think about some things in an independent way, and perhaps you can look at things. You could look at evidence in a way that mainstream Christians would be unable to due to their blinding bias that makes them unable to see that evidence. So that's why I think it is can be valuable to have these type of interactions, and not just we should. I think we should do this with people of all different groups. I think,
Mm, I would agree.
but so yeah. So in terms of morality, the what makes something immoral or moral or ethical unethical? To me, morals and ethics are essentially the same concept. Some people might dispute that, but for me, that is essentially the same thing. The different words. Basically, what is the correct or right things for us to do, and what is wrong, what we should not be doing, and is there a basis for it? Like, there's something called objective morality versus subjective morality. I subscribe to that there is an ultimate objective morality. Whether we can discover it is up to debate, but I think we that it is something that is like essentially a physical rule, a law of nature, where it is set in stone. These things are wrong. These things are right. If you do these things, then you are violating the law of nature. That you may not know about it. Like, let's say you walk off a cliff without realizing it's a cliff. You have your eyes closed, or you're blind and you can't see, and you walk off a cliff. Well, you didn't know that the cliff was there, but the laws of nature and physics, there's a cliff, and if you fall off it, then you will die or you will injure yourself. In the same way, I think it's more, if there is an objective morality, it makes sense that it is some scientific thing, a natural law process where there are rules, and if you violate those rules, you are doing immoral or unethical things. What about you? What are your thoughts?
So I am of the school of thought that morals and ethics are different things because morals apply to your character and your actions. Ethics are how you do right and wrong inside of a subset, like a profession or something of that nature. It's an applied morality, not overarching morality. I also think that morality is immutable and absolute outside of religion and faith, and that there is some natural order to it. I agree with you 100%. We may
And you
not
said
ever
you said morality or ethics.
morality. Morality is there is some natural immutable morality. What it is and how we define it is very unclear. Um,
I'm gonna
Sorry,
just
comment.
yeah.
It's
I just saw
not
that
really
comment.
relevant to anything that we're talking about. But anyway, um,
Well, it's because probably because it says unbeliever. That's probably
oh, yeah,
like you
yeah,
mentioned in the title
must
of our
suggest you're
video.
good. Yeah.
Yeah,
um, but yeah, so what those rules are, I like that you said etched in stone. I mean, just if you take it at its face value, the Ten Commandments would be morality for, well, let's see again. That's not true. No objective moral values without God.
I'm
Implies,
gonna feature those comments in a minute, but
yeah,
we'll address it in a sec.
it's just patently untrue because it implies that without God you can't make good decisions and be good, and that's just not true. There was a show called Afterlife starring Ricky Gervais, and this lady was contesting his atheistic beliefs, and she said, "If you don't believe in God, what's stopping you from raping and murdering anyone you want to?" And he said, "I do. I do rape and murder everyone I want to, and that's nobody.
Right.
If you need
There you
a
go.
book and a higher being to tell you not to rape and murder people, you are already a bad person coming from a bad place. The fear of hell is all that keeps you from doing bad things. Does not make you moral."
And we will revisit those comments. But you were in the middle of a thought, and I forget exactly what you were saying. Do you remember what you were saying?
Oh, I
Well,
was just saying, like, to know what the natural morality code is. I don't know that we'll ever know for sure, but I think that a good the concepts of the Ten Commandments are a starting point, although they are too theistic to be the natural moral code because like, no idol
yeah,
above me, and
right. I'm
the
thinking more
concept
from the. Oh, sorry. What were you gonna say?
I was the concept though, like don't murder. That seems pretty clear. Like that's a
Yeah.
natural order of things that disrupts nature.
Yeah. So I think that, like we said, there's a core morality, an objective morality. Whether or not we can, as limited human beings, come to that correct morality, that's another discussion. Just like in the same way with science, we're discovering new discoveries of science all the time, physics all the time. There's so much about the world we don't know, the way the world works. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means there's our limited we have limited knowledge of the world. We have a lot of knowledge about many things, but we still don't know quite a lot. In the same way, you could argue that maybe there are some very complex things about morality beyond our current understanding, but that we're evolving. Some people believe as we evolve in a society, we become more moral over time. In theory, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that because over time you learn more from experience what works, what doesn't, or what leads to bad consequences. Or so I think that any system which maintains that there is objective morality, that's a system I think we can take seriously or at least respect because they're trying to live by a good, they're trying to be good. They're trying to seek that good. And I
Right.
think that's we want to go to. The other end of the spectrum that there's no morality, it's just made up and it's just a construct, a social construct just so that people behave. I don't think that works because it doesn't feel right because like in my mind, like with our conscience, with if we feel guilty or whatever over something, I'm not saying these things to what you're saying that that oh, if there's no hell or there's no this, then there's nothing wrong with doing these things. But for me, I think it's that there needs to be an objective morality. Otherwise, there's no point to the morality. Like, if murder is not actually wrong, it's just if it's your opinion if it's wrong, well, then that takes away from the importance of not murdering. The reason it's important to not murder is because it's truly wrong and truly a bad thing. But if someone says, oh, it's not actually wrong, it's just a construct of society, then that robs the importance of morality. So I think there has to be some core moral values, absolute morality, how we come to that. We're going to, until, if the Messiah is real, until he comes back and sets his kingdom on earth, then we're going to be debating these things until that ever happens, if it ever happens.
Right.
So, but it's a starting point. And so let's see. I also have. Are you familiar at all with the different like perspectives of like what causes moral or what is moral and what's not? Like what like people, philosophers or whatnot, trying to come up with a system that explains or boils it down to what makes something moral and what doesn't. Are you familiar with any of the nuances or different systems?
I mean, I've read different, texts, but I couldn't tell you, like if there's specific names to them, like Pyarch's definition of morality. I don't know.
Yeah. So let me just address. We're going to address two of the comments from this guy. So the first comment: I have yet to see an atheist providing a coherent explanation of how we can exist without a creator. So if you watch the whole video, we established that my brother-in-law here, he is not an atheist. He believes in God, in a concept of God. So he's not an atheist. So we agree with you that there's not, because he established early on, he agrees with the view that the world is too complicated to exist without some type of creator starting the process. So we both agree with that. So you must have come in later on. It's an irrelevant question in that sense,
Told you
since
that
he's not.
unbeliever was going to be a problem. I told you putting
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, but I didn't know the best way to put it. So then the other one is, are you guys both theists? And so the gut reaction might be, yes, we're both theists, but technically no, because again, he wouldn't you say you're closer to deist? They make a distinction between theist and deist.
He is spiritualist. I don't know what.
I think theist implies like a more personal God intervention type of thing. I don't
Oh,
know for
okay.
sure. I don't know for sure if that's
I'd have to look
essential.
at the deist definition to
Yeah,
be sure, but I probably am a deist.
but we're both believers in God, so that it's important to emphasize. The other one we will answer. The other comment we'll address, but not yet, because it ties into what we're about to talk about. So
I'm a deist.
there, actually, why don't we just talk about it first? So the one thing is called divine command theory, and I'm strongly against the divine command theory. So there's
Divine
this right
command.
here. There can be no objective moral values without God. That's essentially what it is. Are you looking up to see what it is?
Yeah, that an action's status is morally good is equivalent to whether it is commanded by God. Nope, nope,
Yeah.
mm,
So
non-starter.
here's yeah. So I do not believe that's true. Now, what you can say potentially, like you know how you have parents and you have kids. Some things your parents tell you you should do because they're your parent and they're telling you to do it. But not anything. If their parent tells you go and murder that person, don't listen to what your parent says. So in the same sense, it's possible that this lesser fragment of God that we talked about, the Son of God, if he has certain commands he wants us to do, potentially in a father son relationship type of thing, you could argue that some of his commands might be what we should be doing because they are commanded by him. So therefore, it's kind of like a government thing. There are certain laws that a government makes. Outside of that government, there's no actual validity to those laws, but in the confines of that government, it has importance to obey those laws. In the same way, you could make a case that maybe God can create some of these laws for the people. But the divine command theory goes a step farther than that and says something is good only because God commanded it.
Right.
And that I strongly oppose.
It implies that it's only good if God commanded you to do it, and if God commanded you to do it, it is good. And
Yeah.
I
So
cannot get
any
behind that because God tells Abraham to kill his son, and so it's morally good to kill his son. But God stops him.
and of course I have a different view on that whole story
I
as well. But
can't, you know.
I respect that perspective though.
Yeah,
Exactly though. You have to wrestle with that. Like the Bible clearly says, he commanded him to sacrifice his son. And mainstream Christianity, if you were to ask them, is human sacrifice inherently wrong? They would say without a shot, without a second thought, yeah, of course it's inherently morally wrong. Well, if it's inherently morally wrong, then why did God command Abraham to do it? They say
the
just to test
test
him.
is faith, but the test should have been saying no, would prove you were morally superior. Because morality does not come from God. The
Yeah.
morality in that situation would have been to stand up against your God and say, I believe in you and I love you, God, but I cannot do that. That is my son.
Now, I'll give you a slight different perspective from my perspective, is that this is the whole thing we're talking about of what makes something moral. And so we may come to a different conclusion on that. But there's a process, and it's not because God said so. But in terms of like human sacrifice, well, so there are a sizable percentage of what we would call believers in some sense who reject significant parts of the Bible because they oppose animal sacrifice or killing of animals. They're essentially, vegans or vegetarians who believe it's morally, ethically wrong. This guy. All
Womp
right.
womp.
We oppose, they oppose the killing of animals. How do I think there's a way to
Blocked.
block.
Uh,
There we
the Dead Ashes in My Soul sounds like the name of a metal album that I will be purchasing later.
go. All right. So I lost my train of thought. Okay. Great. What
It's
was I
hard
just
with the
saying?
comments there, and
Yeah.
especially when they're insanity.
Um, okay. What were we just talking about? Can you help remind me?
There was we were talking about being commanded to kill your son and morality.
Okay.
We're going to come to different conclusions because I think that you can't morally say yes. I'll kill
Okay.
my son.
So I was gonna say the issue of animal sacrifice or
Oh yes,
killing
that's what it
animals.
is.
So I'm very much sympathetic to that perspective because I can see, and part of me wants to agree with them and say, I like that view that it's unethical to kill animals. But when you look at it from a natural perspective, it doesn't work because animals kill each other and they need to survive, and it's just part of nature. You could make the case maybe that humans don't need to, therefore we shouldn't. But so, but my question, this is just to make us think, is if animal sacrifice is morally acceptable, in theory, couldn't human sacrifice be morally acceptable?
Okay, I hear you, but let's take a step back and say, why is animal sacrifice okay and acceptable?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Why?
We should be wrestling with those things.
This is a morality question outside of God's commands. Why do I have to burn a goat for you? Why?
Right.
Because I commanded it. That's very one-sided. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Like, I need more. I need more
Yeah.
detail. What does this do for you? Like, is
Well,
this
yeah. Yeah.
imbue you with power? Can't I prove my faith in another way? Why would I not question these things?
Yeah. Now, I
Like
believe
evil
though,
act.
even if it's inherently wrong, it comes from the perspective. If you look at the historical context, all other societies basically thought it was fine, human sacrifice. I'm sure there might have been some that didn't, but the surrounding tribes, the surrounding groups of Abraham's time, assuming it's a historical thing, if he lived in, it says he lived in Sumer, so the Sumerians, and they believed. Actually, I'd have to double check this, but I think they believed in human sacrifice. I'd have to double check that. But I know a lot of the ancient groups believed in human sacrifice. So he may not, like, kind of like with the issue of slavery. In older times, people never even thought anything of it because they were naturally predisposed to the idea that slavery was not inherently wrong. But now in our times, we come from the perspective of that we are born with being taught that it is in fact wrong. So with Abraham coming from a different time period, he may not even, that thought may not even cross his mind. Instead of him thinking that this is wrong, I can't do this, this is wrong. He may have been thinking more along the lines of, well, wait a minute, God, you promised me that I was going to have a future through Isaac. So why are you commanding me to kill him? How does that going to work? He might have been thinking about it more from like this is contradicting. It doesn't make sense that you're telling me to do something that goes against what you promised. But he probably wasn't viewing it as, oh, I'm not sure if I should do this. This might be morally wrong, because he probably came from a culture where that wasn't even a thought. Not saying that justifies it, but he probably wasn't even thinking like that.
That's a whole separate argument of how much of the Bible's rules are cultural and how much are actually God's commands. Because that's a whole separate can of worms. We can't
Yeah,
get
that's a
into.
whole, yeah.
Like we'd need many, many hours to break down, like, why do you not have to cover your hair anymore? Why are women allowed to talk? Why this? Why that? Why can we eat bacon?
Right. Yep.
That's a
And
whole.
and if people go to the whole, because God said so. Well, wait a minute. God said to do these things. Why aren't you doing them? What's going on here?
Yeah.
So people are not consistent to their beliefs, I think. But anyway, let's see here. But we both agree that the concept of divine command theory is inherently flawed. It just doesn't work. The idea that God said it, therefore that is what makes it morally acceptable. God says, "Okay, go in and rape these people." All right, that's moral now. Yay!
That's
Or
where it breaks apart for me.
or there's nothing wrong with rape. It could be, there's nothing wrong with rape. Oh, wait a minute. God, tell us what you think. Actually, I say from now on it is wrong. Oh, okay, now it's wrong.
Yesterday it was
That,
okay.
that
Today it's
doesn't that
bad.
doesn't make sense.
Tomorrow you might
Yeah.
break it again. Who knows?
And also, if God just decides arbitrarily what to make moral and not, then there's no, like, they say one of the things about God is all good. Well, if God is the one that makes something good, then He's making Himself good. That robs of any significance of Him being all good when everything
All
He
value is
does is
lost on
good.
it. Right. I
So
agree.
the only significance of God being good would be that He's being good according to a standard that's outside of Himself.
That maybe he made this standard, but he said it once and never changes it.
Yeah, I
These are
still
good. These are bad. Figure the rest out.
I think, like I said, I think he could have created like a government standard, but a core standard above that government standard has to exist, and I think that has to be outside of God's ability to just decide what that standard is. I think, like I said earlier with the mathematics, there has to be these core rules that these are inherently good things and these are inherently bad things, and God can't change that. So I think we're mostly in agreement on that.
Yeah.
Let's see here. This is kind of I mean, this is an aspect of it, but so one thing is called virtue ethics. I don't know if you want to take a look on the Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Um, it kind of goes to the point of, like, there is a system to morality. There's a concepts that make something what it is. So the ancient philosophers, they talked about virtues, and an interesting thing is that these virtues are timeless. You basically, there's nothing about these virtues that you can say is like, oh, that's like the way it used to be, but we're much more advanced now. So like it's how people say the Bible and things like that are kind of like backwards in their way of thinking on certain things. But with these virtues, it doesn't seem like it seems like the virtues were constructed in such a way that they are inherently good things. They cannot be something of the past, and they're no longer good things. So on a list of virtues, it shows like a chart, and it's for Aristotle's list. Do you see that?
Moral
Where
virtue, which is what I was going to say, is virtues sound like morals. They sound like the things that
yeah.
are moral.
So
These are
you have
moral.
so you have the golden mean. This is the thing that Aristotle came up with when he was doing his philosophy, and of course he built off other people too. So the golden mean is basically it's essentially like, what do you call it? There's a better word for it, but like the middle ground thing
Yeah.
where,
The moderation.
yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Moderation. That's exactly what I was thinking of. So the moderation, it seems to actually hold to the virtue. So that if you look at the chart, now some of these I don't quite understand the difference because they use older words like pusillanimity.
No,
There's
actually, that's not
vanity.
an older word. And
Well, no, it's a rarer word.
okay,
So
that's where the word that people use to call people cowardly comes from.
okay, but it's interesting because
Ah,
I'm
yeah.
sure there's a nuance because you have cowardice in the first. You have
Oh no, yeah,
cowardice
yeah, yeah.
in the first, and then you have that pusillanimity. Yeah, however you say that, pusillanimity in a different one. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the chart, I think it kind of supports the idea that there is some rationale to what makes something moral. But in also in a sense, like courage. inherently courage isn't necessarily moral because you could have courage when doing a bad thing, like courage in the face of fear. Well, let's say uh, you are you are doing something bad and you have courage. You're not being rash and you're not being a coward, but you're being courageous
Well,
in a bad thing that you're doing.
are being
So in a
rash because you're doing a bad thing.
well, yeah,
You're not.
you could make that case too. You could say that if you're using courage to do something bad or to do a vice, then it becomes
It's
rash.
excess. It becomes rash. Right. That's the whole point.
Yeah,
You have courage in the face of fear, but taking that courage too far and doing something that's immoral becomes rash.
right. And then the whole thing with temperance is like kind of like it's okay to enjoy yourself, but to enjoy yourself at the expense of others or to not be caring about the needs of others
Right.
is wrong. And so all of these, I think, I really don't see how you can take this list and be like, oh yeah, well this used to be the way people thought, but now we're more advanced as a society, so these things aren't applicable anymore. Like I think these are timeless. You pretty much, no matter what you believe, you should be able to come to this conclusion that these are virtues. So anyway, we can close out that page. That's an interesting.
I really like that though. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the philosophers. A lot of times people think that philosophers just philosophize over stupid stuff, but I think sometimes they do. But they also sometimes really think about these core issues to try to help make society a better place. Like Plato, I don't know if you're familiar with anything about Plato, but one of his writings, I didn't read this particular writing of his, but according to this writing, he basically suggested that the ideal society, of course, would be a virtuous society, but the ideal society, philosophers would basically be in charge because they would be caring about the needs of the people. So, in a sense, philosophy can lead you to it can be tied to so many things. Philosophy leads to politics. Philosophy leads to this, that, of what the proper course of action is, or what to believe about certain things. So then there's so I have here. I don't know if we need to open pages for this, but I have so there's two main different views for like what makes something morally right. There's one called consequentialism and the other is deontological. So the difference for deontological is like a very specific there are rules. If you violate these rules, no matter what, you violate the rule, and that's wrong. Consequentialism goes more the route of a greater good type of approach, where so for as an example, let's say lying. Some might say lying is morally wrong, but there might be a time where you are faced with a decision: should you lie to prevent a horrible atrocity from happening? The deontological perspective might say, no, you should not lie because that is inherently wrong. The consequential one would say that the greater good of causing, we're trying to minimize harm. So the idea that you lying to prevent a greater atrocity would be the morally correct thing to do.
It seems to me like consequentialism is the ends justify the means. If I have to do something
Well,
immoral to
it
accomplish it.
cut that off. Say it again.
I was saying consequentialism seems to be the ends justify the means. If I have to do something immoral in order to achieve a moral goal, it's a little bit better because I got a moral end result. Whereas deontology is the absolute opposite. It's the means justify the end. I will stand my ground based on these rules that are morality, even if it dooms everything else to immorality afterwards.
Yeah, and that is how it's commonly portrayed for consequentialism. Like that's how I used to always think about it. But I think like if you look up on Wikipedia, it says there's also some adherents that like kind of like mix the views together a little bit, like take pieces of this and that and create like a a dual system where there's some deontological principles, but there are also consequentialist principles. Because I just say an example, like I said, the lying example. That's one where you could say, you know what, in that case, it just feels the right thing to do would be to lie in that case. On the other hand, what you just said, if you take it to the nth degree and say the ends justify the means, now you've created a bad problem. So both things don't seem right. So sometimes it seems like a greater good may make something okay, but other times a greater good doesn't make it okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Is
so
morality flexible?
so it is a complex issue, but I think probably what's true is that some middle position where there may be certain core morals which are absolute, where you these are the priorities. These moral issues are the priorities. Then there might be lesser moral things where if those lesser things conflict with the higher priority, then the higher priority takes precedent. It's possible maybe some system like that. I don't know, but it's definitely interesting to think about because it leads us, like all these different groups and religions, they tend to come to a similar ideas. Not, they don't all come to the same ideas, but like they tend to have similar beliefs about, do not murder, do not steal, that's wrong. Some sense of we need justice, and so I think there is indeed a moral, like, one of the ones is do unto others as you would have done unto you, the golden rule. Now there are some criticisms of that, but in general, it's a good principle that you apply. Most religions have some principle like that, and I think it's a good way to frame a lot of things. And let's see, what did I say here?
I actually have a. I don't like the golden rule.
Oh yeah, we've talked about this though. So you have a variant, right?
Right. It is not do unto others as you want done unto you. It's do unto others as they want done unto them. Because what I want is not what you want. Why would I be forcibly making you exist in a world that I create based on my beliefs?
Yeah, and then the other one, there's another one is don't do to others what you don't want done to you.
Oh, yes, and that one's great too. Yeah, I shouldn't punch you in the face if I'm not willing to be punched in the face.
Yeah, and I like that one a lot.
Yeah, that kind of goes hand
So
in hand with, yeah.
so maybe, and if you think about it, if you take both together, do unto others as you want done unto you, and do not do to others what you don't want done to you. If you take it together in a context, then it becomes a better. If you just take the one, do unto others as you want done unto you, then it doesn't make sense. There's some issues with that.
Right. There's more needed. It's too simplified. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the problem. If you try to simplify it too much, it can lead to a silly idea.
Not everything's a punchline, a snippet that can be made so simple.
Right. So let me see here. So here's what I was going to say. So what do you think the consequences of doing something morally wrong are? Is there any consequences? So like we've established that there needs to be a core morality because otherwise it robs morality of any importance. But if there are no consequences, negative consequences to doing bad things, and if there are no good consequences to doing good things, doesn't that also take away from the importance of morality as well? Not to justify it by saying, "Oh, I'm only not murdering people because I don't want to go to hell." Not that, but in the sense of believing that there has to be some consequences or some rewards because we want it to have importance. Do you think there is anything beyond, like, what do you think?
So the idea that there are consequences, yes and no. There are no direct consequences. I don't believe in a system of, hell. I don't prescribe to that particular Christian belief, but the moral consequence of doing immoral things is that you would alienate yourself from moral beings. How do I make that make
No,
sense?
so
You're a
it's
murderer. People who don't like that because they know it's immoral are
yeah,
not going to want to associate with you.
right. But my issue with that in the sense of wanting morality to have importance, to feel important, is that it that view is a little bit too similar for comfort for me to the view that we discussed earlier that we both agreed that we disagree with the view that, oh, it's not actually wrong. It's just what it's an opinion that is wrong. It's just the society has decided this is wrong. So the idea that it's murder is wrong, we agree is absolutely wrong. But if the only consequences are that it ostracizes you from the rest of society, then it seems to almost lead to the same conclusion as the other one, where in the end, if you don't mind being ostracized, then it doesn't necessarily matter in a grand scheme. If you want to murder someone and you accept to yourself, I don't care if I'm ostracized, whatever, I'm going to murder someone, then there's no way to feel, it doesn't seem like there's any way that can be rectified. And that to me feels like something that we're missing something, or that there's like an emptiness to that.
Well, that's the thing, is that whether you are okay with being ostracized or not is irrelevant. You did the immoral thing. You are an immoral person. There is
But
That's just on your record. You are tarnished in that way. That is the consequence. That is the only consequence. You are now immoral.
so interesting thing about ostracize in the context of the Bible is it says that everyone's going to be resurrected, and then basically the people who are saved or righteous, whatever, they'll be in New Jerusalem. Everyone else will be outside, excluded from that. So in a sense, that is a form of ostracism, where you're not in this gated community, and maybe there are certain benefits in that community that they don't have. So
Right.
in some ways, it kind of goes along with what you're saying about the ostracizing. But I personally believe, let's say, for example, that the creator or whatever created it isn't actually sentient. Maybe it's more of just a like, instead of making a decision to create, maybe everything did poof into existence, but from a cause. But this cause is just nature, and there's no decision process whatsoever. It just happened. Even so, I believe as long as you have a system where there is a all our moral actions or immoral actions receive consequences, whether positive or negative, I think that is a system that is good. Whether God exists or not, to me, the more important thing is whether our actions will be held accountable to. So I think, just in this life, as in this life, we have negative things. Like if we do something bad, then something bad will happen to us. Not always, but like and if we harm our bodies, then our if we do something injurious to our bodies, then our bodies will be harmed. I think that I believe in a system where everything we do in this life is kind of, there is a, well, as you said, tarnish, or it's attached to you, so that if we do indeed have another life, and I'm not sure if you believe we have another life or not, we can talk about that in a second, but I think that if there's another life, then that would allow for, if we were resurrected, I believe we will be in similar bodies we are now. I don't really believe in like us just floating around and being, magic spirit beings. I think if there is a future life, it will be almost the same as this, just better. There'll, maybe less, there won't be all this pain and suffering for like cancer and all these different things, and we won't be killing animals for food and things like that. But I think there will still be a lot of the similar stuff. If that is true, then there could be a system where we have some sort of negative consequences. But I agree with you in the sense that the common concept of hell to me doesn't make sense, where you exist solely to be tortured for all of eternity, and
Yeah.
that's your sole purpose, and nothing else, and there's no redemption, there's no value in it. So why? What's the purpose of it? So for me, that starts to fall apart. And if that is what the case is, you would think, in the Bible, like in the Law of Moses, it gives rules of what to do, the prophets. You would think if it's such an important issue that you will lose your soul forever if you don't do certain things, you would think they'd be warned a little bit more in the Bible about it, in the Old Testament. Like, there's almost nothing in the Old Testament about being tortured forever if you don't do certain things. So
Right.
it
Yeah.
seems weird that God would not tell us about that. On the other hand, if we all eventually will be saved or be redeemed in the end, then whether or not we will be saved doesn't necessarily matter. So in my current belief, based on, I've changed my beliefs over time, but basically I believe that if you are good enough in this life, you don't, you will be saved, or you will not be. You basically just have to stop. You have to not be evil, and you have to be a good enough person, in my view. Then you avoid that, basically that purification process or the punishment process. Everyone else that doesn't isn't good enough then has to go through a purification process where they have to be punished for what they've done, but it's more of a redemptive punishment over time. So, and it's like, it's not like they're in jail, like in chains, like the common depictions of hell. It's more of they're living life. And, there's people who are living with body pains, like, elderly people, especially, they have like bodily pains. And in some ways, it feels like a torturous life for them. But they still find things to be joyful about and to enjoy life. So I think there is some type of concept there. For me, I feel like there needs to be a concept where we continue to exist after this life, and that we do receive consequences for what we do. I think the vast majority, if there is a future life, the vast majority of everyone will have to be purified from the bad things they've done. I think very few people are going to be skipping that process because, like, I include myself
Near
in that.
zero.
I don't. Well, yeah, near zero. I think I don't currently meet the high standard that needs to be done to avoid that purification process of the evil, of you being dealt with for the evil you've done in your life or the bad things. People don't like the word evil; they think it's too strong a word. So, but the bad things you've done, you will have to answer for it, I believe. Because if you don't, then it just seems to take away from, like, we need justice, and I feel like if we don't get justice in this life, it seems like there has to be some sort of divine justice in the next life, if there
But
is a next
why
life.
does it need to be punitive and not a rewarding process? Why can't it just be there's nothing for immoral people? That's it. You've lived an overly immoral life. You had your chance. That was Earth. Have a good time. It's over. For people who have lived a moral and good life, they move on and have some process where they can, exist. I don't know that I believe in an afterlife. I'm still on
Yeah,
the
so I was gonna ask you. So you're on the fence on that, you say?
it's very complicated, the concept, because it goes back to the beginning of time and goes until the end of time. All of the good people are going to be there. How does that work? So what about people who remarry? And so do they get to go to heaven and be with both their wives? Do they get two heavens? Do they get to experience both heavens? It's a weird concept. And do they all have to get along together? What if they didn't get along in life, but they're good people? So you have two wives
So I
fighting.
would argue that it's possible that if they didn't get along in real life, then one of them is not fully good. And our definition of what good is, I think, like I would say in general, I think I'm overall, like, I'm good, a good person in many ways. But there's certain things about me that I know for a fact I'm a bad person for because of those things.
Right.
But
You've done a bad
I
thing,
have
make you a bad person.
say it again.
You've done a bad thing that doesn't make you a bad person.
But I would say yes and no to that. Like it's a complex thing. It's like it's a when someone says someone's a bad person, it makes it seem like that's all they are. But if it's a mix between bad and good, then they're a middle person. So they're both a good person and a bad person. So I think the vast majority of people have good and bad parts about them,
Absolutely.
and it's something we all should be striving to improve for ourselves. But unfortunately, a lot of mainly Christians, they think Jesus saved me, so I don't have to. I could do whatever I want, and
I
they.
cannot allow any talk of deathbed savings.
Oh no, no, I
You
don't
don't
either.
get to be a piece of crap your whole life and then on your deathbed, even if you genuinely mean it. No.
Yeah,
That's a part of Christianity I will never tolerate. Like,
yeah, and
no.
all the other religions. This is something I appreciate about the other religions is that they teach. We have to be good people in order to be saved.
Right.
if we did something bad, most religions teach we need forgiveness from God.
Right.
How that happens, is what can be debated, but we need forgiveness from God. But we won't be forgiven if we keep being horrible people. So
Right.
we got to stop being horrible people, and only then can we be forgiven. But Christianity says you can
11th
still be a
hour.
horrible person.
Yeah. Christianity allows for that 11th hour. Well, I won't do anything else that's horrible, and that's
Yeah,
not okay to me.
and of course we're talking about an aspect of Christianity. There's a whole myriad of different views. There's some who believe you can't lose your salvation, and some who believe you can. And the ones who believe you can lose your salvation, some say, well, if you do horrible things, then that proves you were never saved to begin with. Others believe the worst view, that if you do something horrible, then that doesn't make you lose your salvation. You're still saved no matter what you do, and that's what we have to oppose. We have to oppose that. That's one of the main things that's important on my channel here, is that I strongly disagree with that type of Christianity. So I appreciate in all these other religions, but that's it's funny. That's one of the things that they try to say. Mainstream Christians try to say is what sets Christianity apart and makes it the true religion, is that all the other ones are works based salvation, but Christianity, the true religion, is the only one that teaches we can't be saved by our works, only by faith. And I just completely disagree with that
Yeah.
idea. It doesn't make sense.
It is probably one of my stronger points of contention with Christianity. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I did have a thing here. So I think for the most part, we're probably going to skip the politics. We might be able to touch upon it slightly, but there's a thing I said: critique of Christianity. So, what things does mainstream Christianity get wrong? Because we're kind of on this topic now, so I figured might as well say anything
Yeah.
further.
Yeah.
How could they improve? What puts you off from Christianity most? Can you come up with a more authentic faith of Christianity? So yeah, just lay it on us.
All
Tell
right.
us? Yeah,
What
let's
does
hear it.
mainstream Christianity get wrong? The Bible. What could they improve? Reading the Bible. What puts me apart from Christian? What puts me off from Christianity the most? Christians. And can you come up with a more authentic faith of Christianity? Yeah, follow the Bible.
Yeah,
So I'm not allowing for cherry picking. You either
yeah,
believe the whole thing or you don't. You don't get to go in there and wear mixed fabrics and eat bacon, but then denounce homosexuality. Non-starter. That's not how this works.
yeah.
We've had these discussions before about Old Testament versus New Testament and what's allowed, you know, what's allowed in Christianity in the New Testament. It's very unclear. Jesus appears to say, you know, let's not worry so much about those stringent rules. That was a bit heavy-handed and unnecessary. All those sins I'm going to absorb, and you start over fresh. You don't have to do all that stuff anymore. Just live and be good people and follow God, and you're good Christians. Give or take is Jesus's spiel. That's not how Christians live. They are judgy. They are uh, what's the word? They impose their will onto others. They cherry pick scripture to fit an argument. To your point about like contradictory parts of the Bible, they will literally use both contradictory parts of the Bible in two different arguments. Like, how do you
Yeah.
do this? And like, how do you rectify that?
So my biggest thing is like hypocrisy,
Right.
and so I strongly oppose that. And then also, I agree with you that they don't really follow the Bible. They need
Right.
to. I will say though that so for what you said about there's actually like, so my channel has a lot of people who actually do believe in following the Old Testament as well as the New. But there's a lot of nuance to that, and there's a lot of internal debate about certain aspects of that. Like
Yeah.
like for example, how do we implement those things? And another thing is like there's the whole animal sacrifice system. Well, there's a whole subset of the people who believe that we should be following the Old Testament laws that say except the animal sacrifice stuff, because that would go against Jesus' sacrifice. The idea that we still need to do animal sacrifices, well, then that would take away from Jesus' sacrifice for us to save us from our sins. Then there's people like me who believe the whole thing, including the animal sacrifice system, is still supposed to still be done, and it's not contradictory. So you have a myriad of beliefs, but at least these people are trying to wrestle with it and trying to follow what Scripture says. I will say, you know, from years ago, I was keeping the Sabbath every week.
Mhm.
I stopped keeping the Sabbath for a couple of reasons. One, over time, I discovered that certain books that I accept as scripture seem to indicate that one, only originally only Israel was supposed to keep the Sabbath to like be a separate sign for the nations. And then number two, those who are part of the church are now also to keep the Sabbath. Some of the books I accept actually say that. But I came to believe of myself. Well, first of all, I'm not an Israelite, and then I came to the conclusion I'm not part of the church because I was baptized into the church as a baby, and but it was part of the Protestant churches. I personally believe this is a interesting thing about me is that like all the different groups of Christianity, whether they are right or wrong on certain things, I consider most of the groups to be valid in the sense of they are the true church. But for Protestants, almost all Protestant churches, I don't consider to be the true church. I consider them to be like, they basically just gave themselves authority and made themselves leaders of churches or whatever. So I personally, like, the mega churches and things like that, I don't consider those churches. And so for me, I think that my baptism in the Protestant church, I don't think it was valid. For me personally, I believe to be part of the church, I have to be baptized into a real church, a valid church. So I consider myself not yet part of the church. I'm supposed to be, and I'm putting it off. And the reason I'm putting it off is because there's certain sins in my life that I think I need to change first, and I'm not doing that yet because of laziness, spiritual laziness, and contentment with those things. Like lust primarily. So I feel like there are certain books I accept as scripture that say you have to stop doing certain sins before you're baptized. A lot of Christians say it differently. Just doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing. Just be baptized. Come to the church and you're saved. And again, I disagree with that view. I think
Right.
it's called joining a covenant. I think it's a serious thing. If you're making a covenant with God, you're making a promise, a commitment. You shouldn't be doing that like willy nilly. You should be doing if you're going to make a covenant, you should be following it. So that's why I don't currently keep the Sabbath, is because I don't feel like I'm part of the church yet, and I'm not Israel. So, but I do plan to start doing it again. And I was doing it pretty extreme years ago. So it's not that I was unwilling to do it. It's just that over time my beliefs evolved, and I was like, you know what? It seems like this is not for me yet. And also, I was feeling hypocritical, and that's like, yeah, I'm keeping the Sabbath. Meanwhile, watching stuff I shouldn't be watching on the Sabbath. I'm
Yeah.
not keeping the Sabbath. I'm not keeping the Sabbath if I'm doing that. So, am I going to be hypocritically keeping the Sabbath, or I'm just going to say, you know what, I'm not keeping the Sabbath yet until I'm purifying myself in my life to a point where I can keep the Sabbath every time without being hypocritical. Then yes, then I'm going to start keeping the Sabbath, and I'm going to join a church, but not yet. So we're getting, let's see. So I said around 2 hours would be our max. So let's try to wrap it up for the 2 hours. We have about 15 minutes left. Let's see here. Um, your critique of Christianity, though, I feel like is a little bit broad stroked, like kind of like, read the Bible. Da, 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 da. I'm curious about more specifics. Would there be anything more specifics, like of what you feel like would improve Christianity and but still preserve their basic beliefs for the most part, but just improve either behavior or a few particular beliefs they have, or like I don't know anything, any
I mean,
insights?
if you want to get into it, then we can get into it. But like, we're talking about hundreds of years of translation and additions to the Bible. So trying to stick to any of the codes of ethics and morality that are in the Bible is asinine. Um, we've talked about this before, and I encourage you to look it up. The word homosexuality did not exist in the Bible until 1946 in English translations of the Bible. It was added in. It used to be pederasty, and even in the German versions of the Bible, it was still pederasty until the 1980s. They just didn't want men to sleep with little boys. Makes sense coming from a cultural shift from Greek tradition where that was normal, that would be a rule you would want. So I want Christians to critically think about the Bible. That would improve Christianity. If they could look at all of the rules and say, all of these rules are either exactly, immutably the word of God, and they always were this, and it was wrong before, or these are written by men and are culturally changing, and we shouldn't take them so harshly. So I don't know, and just be more Christ-like.
Yeah.
A free thinker who supports others, loves all unconditionally, even if they do him wrong, and stands up against oppression. We were talking
So
about this recently. Like all of his teachings are actually rebellious. Turn the other cheek
so
is rebellious.
yeah. So let's see if you are good with this type of characterizations. So not blindly dogmatic.
Yes.
So kind of like what I was saying earlier, where I might come from the perspective of believing the Bible is true, but I still look at evidence and question it. But you would like that probably more because I still pretty much follow the Old Testament or accept its validity. You would you prefer it to go the route of where people aren't following those things, but you want them to take an honest look at it and be consistent and, like you said, think critically so that, like, for example, there's so many things the Bible doesn't actually say, and yet people are dogmatic about. And this ties in with politics, for example, is like climate change. Why would it be that the issue of climate change has anything to do? The Bible doesn't talk about it really much in terms of like their position. You could actually make the case that the Bible goes the other direction and supports the side of the issue of climate change.
Right.
But for their belief, there's no biblical reason why they should be dogmatic about the climate change problem, and yet they are, and it's because of political identity. And they've tied it into Christianity when there's no reason to tie Republican beliefs not across the board to tie republicanism into the Bible. They're not the same.
They're almost
Yeah,
antithetical. To be honest,
yeah.
like Christian beliefs and American conservatism don't have a lot of hand-in-hand connections. You really have to justify your political action as a conservative and a Christian. You have to just
Yeah,
like take a blind eye to the Bible every time you
and
make a decision.
and it's interesting because you have on the one hand you have the people who say the Bible is the word of God and I believe everything it says supposedly, but then you have them blindly following the politics contrary to what the Bible says.
Right.
If they truly followed, if you had someone who's like, you know what, I'm going to take you for what you say. You follow whatever the Bible says. If they truly did that, then they would not be conservatives.
That's not physically possible.
They would be. They may not necessarily be strictly liberal either, but it would probably be leaning more liberal in many things. But I don't know if you could say 100% of everything following the Bible
Yeah.
100%. But I think it would lean more towards liberal. I want to make a future video series where I explain my politics, my views on the politics, and explain from the Bible each policy position we should have and why I think we should have it based on what the Bible actually says. So I'll be touching on immigration, and yeah, I might have what's it called?
Contradictory.
No, I can't even think of the word. It's I can't believe when your brain is doing
Yeah.
that. It's the word where it's like, oh yeah, controversial. I don't know why I couldn't think controversial
Oh, okay.
because I was thinking contra, and my brain kept saying contradictory, and I was like, no, what is the word? All right, so controversial. So I may come to controversial conclusions, but everything I will say will be based. I can back it up from what the Bible says. This policy position supported from this verse, and I want to do a video like that.
That'd be fun.
So I think it'll be interesting. But so of the, I know we're running out of time. So of the political different issues, what would you say are the top three in order of importance? Let's start with top first, and then if you want to say a second and third, what would you prioritize for the three main political issues that you think we should all be focusing on for the world or for America or whatever?
Well, let's
What's
tie
your
it all
take?
into what we're talking about here. Morality and ethics is number one. So, doing things that are good for others without the need for it to directly benefit you is needs to come back to our government and to our people. This idea that, well, I didn't get one, or it doesn't help me, so why would I put in the effort or the money? It's got to go. And
So it's yeah. So individualism is a
individualism
bad
is
thing,
horrible for
essentially.
humanity. We aren't individuals. We can act as individuals and enjoy our lives individually, but I want what's best not just for me, but for everyone. And if that means my best is a little lowered, that's okay. Um, and politics in this country, what would be great is if people would follow the rules. Like, morality is one thing, but what about ethics? Ethics are applying morality in the realm of law and profession, and so following the rules that have been set forth before you, um, whatever your
Yeah,
feelings politically are, overreach is a problem. Because I don't remember if I mentioned this to you the other day, but I was, let's say you love everything that's happening right now, but it is being done by overreach. That's not debatable. That's overreach that's making it happen.
yeah, yeah,
Someday it's not going to be someone you agree with, and they're going to continue that overreach. We got to stop now, or it's going to become the pendulum swing is going to be so aggressive when we have political change again. So, like, no matter how you think
yeah.
it's bad.
And we can't go back and forth like, all right, Republican in power this time, he's going to change everything
Yep.
wildly to this side. Democrat comes in power, everything
And it's
wildly to this side.
whiplash every
It would be
4,
too
8, 12,
chaotic.
20
Yeah.
years.
Um,
Like, what world are we creating?
but one of the things I do appreciate about, like, at least historically in the past, I don't know, 20 something years or something, uh, it's kind of gone back and forth. You have a Democrat president and then you have a Republican, and so what I like about that is that it is sort of like a course correction. If you swing too far in one direction, you could get too far off in certain things, and then it kind of goes back and forth. I know that process also means a lot of times we won't fix things that need to be fixed as soon, but at the same time, it prevents it from going way off track. Like what you said, if we don't follow the rules, then it's going to go way out there, and we don't want it to be extreme. We want it to be. I'd rather have some concessions and compromise on certain policies, but it be a stable system than to have something where you have potential dictatorship or whatever, where you can't keep it contained, and now they could. What if they want to impose? Well, I know technically legally they can do this, but if they reinstate the draft,
Right.
for example, to me that
Yeah.
would be a horrible thing. But they have the power to do that, and I wouldn't want them to do that. But so,
Great example, though. You know,
yeah, so it's
overreach
like
is a problem for a reason.
I,
Yeah.
I,
I have a solution for your
yeah,
compromise and,
so
like, working the other thing, and it's let's break this most recent tradition of having vice presidents. It used to be until, oh God, the mid to late 1800s, that the person who got the most votes was president, and the person who got the second most votes was vice president. And yes, that often meant that they were from opposing parties, because they didn't do the
yeah,
primaries and
that's going to
having
be
single
interesting.
candidates thing. So you'd have 4 Democrats and 7 Republicans running. You might get 2 Republicans, you might get 2 Democrats, or you might get 1 and 1, and they would have to work together. And also, the vice president has that tie breaking Senate vote, so it's very powerful. It brings compromise back to the table. right now, what would we have? We would have, a Trump Kamala presidency, and that would be very weird, but might slow some of this overreach down.
It might also be interesting if the vice president had a little bit more power, a
I'm
little bit
also okay with
more
that. Yeah.
contribution. But yeah, I think I also what I also like is, let's say, at least this happened earlier in the first term of Trump's presidency, where you had the first 2 years he had control of. I can't remember if he had full control of each one, just like he does now. I think he did. I think he had control of the Senate
Mhm.
and the House. Not necessarily I don't remember about the judges, but anyway, they had the House and the Senate, and then in the midterms they lost
Right.
control. They didn't have
Right.
full control anymore. In some ways, I like that because that's a control, a check
Right.
on the president. So you have the president from the one side, and then you have Congress from the other side controlling the president. So I think if after these first 2 years, if we still have the country, like you said,
If the overreach
then
doesn't make that not
then
relevant.
yeah. So then the midterms, hopefully, the midterms will be like a course correction and and bring things back to a more
Historically, they
stable
do,
thing.
yes.
That's the
And
hope.
so historically, our Senate and House are going to move to the other direction, and that's fine if that's going to maintain relevancy. Like I said, it may not matter because it just
Yeah.
doesn't. It just ignores what they say.
And then the other issue we have is the demonization of the other
Othering,
side.
just call it othering.
What we
Yeah,
see, yeah,
political othering.
yeah. So the way Republicans do it, they say everything's
Right.
socialism or communism. And as someone who's a communist, like if you look, see right here, as someone who's a communist, I socialism is not communism. Let me
And
make this
leftists
clear
are
to you.
not
Okay,
socialists or communists necessarily.
so socialism is a good thing, but it doesn't go far enough. So biblically, there's certain passages I could direct people, and this in my channel features about these topics sometimes. There's very strong communist statements from Jesus, Yeshua, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I subscribe to. My channel is called Dead Sea Scrolls Religion because I believe that around the time that Jesus came, there was Judaism. Christianity wasn't there yet, and there was different denominations, if you will, Pharisees, Sadducees, and one of the main groups was called the Essenes, according to Josephus, a writer from the first century. And the Essenes, I believe, were the true Jewish group that had the most correct beliefs, and they were communists. They were Jewish communists, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls and according to Josephus' writings. The way they
Right.
describe it, a complete communist system. And so because I agree so much with the Essene beliefs and the Dead Sea Scrolls, that I consider that as part of my foundation to my faith, with the New Testament enhancing it, because they were looking for a Messiah too. So I think Jesus was that Messiah, and then he continued their faith, but with a renewed, New Testament context. But yeah, so the communism I think is actually a good thing, but so many people malign it because they don't understand it and they demonize it. And the same problem, Democrats demonize to a certain extent as well. But I think, in my experience, Republicans seem to do it more in terms of name calling and like demonizing to the extent that they do.
Yeah,
So
or at least in the sense that Republicans will generalize all leftists as far leftists, whereas I do see on the left it tends to be more of a targeted this person or these people. That's just
right,
anecdotal.
and you do, and you definitely have nuance on the left side. I mean, just look at the issue of Israel. You had a
Right.
clear different viewpoint on the left. So okay, we're pretty much out of time here. Let's see. Um, would you say the best way for political politics would be like for what you said to focus on? Would you say like because you were saying like helping others and stuff or like not caring
Right.
about yourself? So would you say like the most important things with that would be like immigration or what would be like the policies that you think are what manifests
I
what you were
mean,
saying?
I think that the reason people care about immigration, the reason people care about uh, uh, God, like trans rights and stuff is it's based in worrying about how you feel about something, not about how other people feel about something. Rights isn't pie. I don't have to give you a piece of my pie to give you rights. So yes, thinking about other people in the terms of
Yeah.
immigration, that's a just who cares? Literally, who cares?
Yeah, but caring about other people in the sense
Help them.
of like from your perspective, helping them. So would immigration be like perhaps the most important issue for you, or not
No, it's
necessarily?
not. I
Like
wish that it could be.
it's a top
The
though.
way
It's a
we
top,
treat
but
immigrants is
it,
important, but like caring about
well, that's what I mean. Like caring, like not like for example, not deporting
yeah,
them,
I
like
just
not or not deporting them in the way that's
it's
being done. Uh,
it's factually more expensive to be doing the things that we're doing than whatever possible drain you think they are on the economy. The vast majority of illegal immigrants are here because of expired visas and stuff like that. You know,
yeah,
um, so yes, I think that it's what we should do is just go, oh, you're a person and you have value.
yeah.
Continue to have value. What can I do to help you generate more value back?
So you might not be able to give a good answer to this, but this is kind of what I'm looking for. Is how some people on the Republican side are one
Yeah,
issue voters, and we discussed how that's not
it's true.
necessarily a good
Yeah,
thing. But if you were a one issue voter, what would that one issue be? Like the issue that more important than any other issue. Do you have one, or do you feel like you can't
I would
really?
have to pick something that I think cascades. So you pick a marginalized group that's
Yeah.
small, that if we can get them rights, we can get anyone rights. So it would be trans rights. It's such a marginal group. It's like a tenth of a percent of people, so getting them rights to exist and live freely means that we've done it. And when we start taking those things away, who's next is always the concern. They lose their
Okay.
rights,
And
then
so you
immigrants
think
lose their rights.
that
Then what? We go back to uh, like segregation is next. Like what's next? And I'm not trying to go down the slippery slope argument
yeah.
because I think that that's
Right.
bad
Right.
faith doing slippery slopes. But you can see it happening right now. So instead of worrying about these people, like I said, rights aren't pie. So if I had to be a single issue voter, it would be
Yeah.
who does better things for trans people because they're the most marginalized right now.
So and like you said, so you feel like that issue then leads to it cascades
Right.
into the rest of it. So it's like it's the starting point, and then it
Right.
leads to the other things. So
Some of the people might go with like,
okay,
here's a slightly
um,
marginalized group, and if we can get them rights, then we can keep going. I'd like to start all the way on the
right,
far, like who's the most marginalized, and then work our way up.
okay. The final thing I'll say is like I think if you ever do study like other religions, I found a lot of value in the different world perspectives. I'm one of the few people that like if you had put me in take my current mind and place me before Jesus was born, I could, in theory, potentially have been any
Right.
religion because I find good aspects in pretty much all of them. Uh, I truly believe you can be a good person and faithful to God in just
Yep.
about any religion, including uh, Islam. Of course, that wasn't around at the time, but Hinduism and Zoroastrianism. So a unique thing about me is that I basically consider, although what I consider scripture is a little bit of a complex thing, but um, basically from these different groups, like you have Hinduism, some of their books I consider scripture, Quran I consider scripture, um, a little bit of Zoroastrian stuff. So Buddhism, they have their core texts, and so but to me, scripture is a little bit different. It's not everything in this is the word of God and flawless and can't be wrong. It's more about these people had a divine encounter and then they wrote about their experience, but they included their opinions. So some of it's true, some of it's good, and some of it might be off base. But I value it enough to study it and view it as an authority, and I include like Plato's writings too in that value. So there's a lot of cool stuff out there that I think you'd find interesting. I don't know if you would find it as applicable because you feel like it's more like older stuff that's not as relevant
Right.
for our times. But I think even for the sake of understanding the evolution of history and how we got to where we are today, I think it would be pretty interesting for you. But all right, we're out of time. We'll end it with let's read a few of these funny
God, some
comments
of those
here.
got unhinged.
19 days ago, I prayed to Jesus that he would send his angels to all mankind and give you real bread. Well, I hope he comes.
I'm
Thank you so
celiac. I
much.
can't have your bread.
There you go. Gluten-free bread, gluten-free. Okay, this one we're gonna say is for you,
Okay.
not for me. Okay, you are spectacularly idiots whom worship your lies and perverted words.
I mean, I assume it was me.
And then
Yeah.
this one you liked. All your words are from the dead
Well, that's the
ashes in
devil
your
album I said I was
souls.
going to buy. The Dead Ashes of Our Souls. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even know what this one's saying. If you are Jewish, I am the man of the earth.
I don't know
Blend,
what that means.
do not
Like,
mix.
no context.
I,
Like, all right. Yeah,
I
it's not
appreciate
what
this
we
one who said you are a dishonest
know. Like,
sleazebag. Thank you. And
that
then
wasn't too bad. That guy was the one that just asked if we were theists. He just came in late. I don't know why this guy thinks we're crazy though.
no, oh wait, oh yeah, you're right. So maybe he meant it for
God,
Wesley. I don't know. Maybe he meant to say your sleazebag
but you
to
have
Wesley.
obviously
I
never
don't know.
read the Bible.
But
Yeah, maybe you.
yeah, you're all crazy. Well, I could tell you, at least for me, I've read the Bible
Many
probably more times
times,
than you have.
dozens.
But and then the Quran, I
I
definitely have
haven't.
read the
I read
Quran.
the gist of it.
Not all, not 100%, but there was a time in my life where I identified as a Muslim in 2020
Oh,
in 2012. I I consider myself Christian, but also Muslim. So I was saying Muhammad was the true prophet, and I still think that, but in a lesser way. Like I wasn't like I was basically boldly declaring, Islam is true, the Quran, and I was saying a lot of Muslim things and trying to be a Muslim and Christian. Now it's more, I believe the Quran is true, but I'm not gonna identify as Muslim or say that. So anyway, but I definitely need to study it more. But the reason I got into it was because there's so many accusations from Christians about how barbaric the Quran and Islam is. Well, if you look, it's almost all the same
but
stuff in the Old
that's when
Testament.
it's like put
So,
non-believers to the sword. So
so it's really, I can't take these people seriously who are so blinded against Islam when they don't realize it's the Old Testament,
yeah,
just slightly different.
yeah,
So,
through a slightly different cultural lens.
all right, man. We could, as we said, we could go on and talk for a long time, but we'll end it here. Any final thoughts you want to share?
It's all in good fun. We're just trying to find the answers. We're never gonna, but I think that some of these people, I
Yes,
think
we
some of these people
will.
take it a little too seriously as they watch.
Well, I actually was pretty
It wasn't
pleased
as
how
bad as
this
I
turned
thought it
out.
was
I
gonna
wasn't
be.
sure
When you say
how it was going to go.
unbeliever, I keep
I
telling
think I think
that.
it's wait, not as bad. That means you
It
thought
was
it was
pretty
bad.
bad.
Okay,
Yeah,
no.
like yeah. That's
Well,
what I
the
mean. No,
comments you
no,
mean,
the conversation was great.
but I mean, yeah, that's what I mean. The conversation, I feel like we had a good thing. I didn't
Yeah,
know how it was
no,
going to go, and I feel like we did a
we have
good
great
discussion.
discussions all the
So
time. I'm glad to do it
thank
on
you.
cam.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it so much, and maybe see you later today.